Good morning. My name is Matt Alspaugh. Our words of welcome are from Katie Romano Griffin. Come, let us enter this space of hope and community. Come, let us enter this space with our sorrows, our joys, our passion and compassion. Come, let us enter this space with the stories of our ancestors, for the strength and wisdom, their strength and wisdom beats in our hearts. Come into this space, present to the beloved companions who move around us. Come into this space, mindful that together we are building a future for other generations. Come into this space and let us worship. And so, as every week, I just want to welcome you with live from Fellowship Hall. It's our LCUUF Sunday service. Okay, maybe that's a little overdone, but maybe not. Our announcements were on a slideshow before the service. If you didn't see them, we will be sending them out in an email tomorrow or the next day, sharing them with you.
Our chalice lighting words today are offered by Daniel Faria of the Alliance of Portuguese-Speaking Unitarian Universalists. We light this chalice as a symbol of faith, hope, and love. To face the shadows, a chalice of light. To face inequity, the chalice of justice. To face falsehood, a chalice of truth. To face evil, a chalice of goodness. To face disharmony, a chalice of beauty. May your brightness, manifestation of the infinite light, bless our hearts, our spirits, and our lives. Y en español, or in Spanish, estas palabras son ofrecidas por Daniel Faria, de la Alianza Unitaria Universalista de Lengua Portuguesa. Encendemos este cáliz como símbolo de fe, esperanza y amor. Para enfrentar las sombras, un cáliz de luz. Para enfrentar la inequidad, un cáliz de justicia. Para enfrentar la falsedad, un cáliz de verdad. Para enfrentar la maldad, un cáliz de bondad. Para enfrentar la discordia, un cáliz de hermosura. Que tu brillo, manifestación de la luz infinita, bendiga nuestros corazones, nuestros espíritus y nuestras vidas. Please light your chalice.
We kindle this light in celebration for the life that we share.
Our opening hymn is number 21, We'll Build a Land.
We'll build a land when we bind up the broken. We'll build a land where the captives go free, where the oil of gladness dissolves all mourning. Oh, we'll build a promised land that can be. Come, build a land where sisters and brothers, anointed by God, and then create peace where justice shall roll down like waters, and peace like an ever-flowing stream. We'll build a land where we bring the good tidings to all the afflicted and those who mourn, and we'll give them gardens instead of ashes. Oh, we'll build a land where peace
we take time to remind ourselves that we belong to a community which cares for each other. We do this by sharing any significant joys or sorrows in our lives. If you have a joy or sorrow to share today, you can type it into the chat now, and we'll read those aloud. First, let us voice our sorrows or concerns, whatever you or the world may be holding that is in need of our healing and caring thoughts. You are welcome to type those sorrows and concerns in the chat box.
We have a concern for the people of India, where the pandemic is raging through the population. Liz Mulder shares, my goddaughter, who is Nepalese and whose father is East Indian, thankfully is in Texas. That's all.
Joys? Now let us recall the joys, whatever you may be celebrating, whatever evokes a feeling of joy or peace for yourself or others. You are welcome to type joys in the chat box now.
We have a joy from Trudy Crippen, who says, joy that longtime fellowship member Carol Powell and newly returned members Hannah and Howard Frederick will be here full-time as of this week.
I have a joy, if there's no other one. I'm traveling to Portland, Oregon this week, and I have a chance to visit with my daughter that I'm really looking forward to.
We have a joy from Howard Frederick, who says, we celebrate our arrival in Ahihic, where souls matter amongst a fellowship that leads in digital ministry. Looks like that's all. Thank you.
And the care candle we light, and it is from our care team. This represents the sorrows that are too raw, too difficult for us to share aloud. So many of us have had losses, partners, children, grandchildren, losses that remain present with us every day. So many of us have burdens, anger, fear, and frustration, and all those things that weigh heavy on our hearts. We will light this candle for all those unspoken sorrows. Now.
So I invite you into a time of meditation, a time of quiet, a time when we can just set aside all of the busyness, all of the thoughts, the hamster wheels running in our minds, and just take time to be with ourselves, with our bodies. For today, I invite you to simply be with your body. No judgment, no thinking about pains and aches or anything like that, other than perhaps just to notice them. Just take a little time now to notice the weight of your body in your chair or on the floor or in the bed, wherever you happen to be. Just notice the fact that the earth is carrying that weight, supporting you, and just enjoy the fact that you are being held by the earth. And then just to turn inwards to notice different aspects again, without judgment. Maybe just noticing little feelings, whether they're itches or little aches, pains, the breathing, the in-breath, the out-breath. Just take a little time to notice all of these things. We'll just have a time of silence for maybe a minute or so while we can turn inward and notice our bodies. Blessed be.
Our 7 principles in story and verse. Today's first reading is from the book, Our 7 Principles in Story and Verse by Ken Collier. This reading is from his selection on the first principle. We are called to affirm the inherent worth and dignity of people whom we thoroughly dislike, people whom we find obnoxious, obstreperous, overbearing, and frightening, people whom we find abhorrent and whose beliefs and behavior we find disgusting, and even people who would deny, silence, or destroy us. Every person includes the people we love and the people we dislike. It includes the oppressed and the oppressor. It includes the victim and the perpetrator. It includes the Jews of Central Europe as well as Hitler. It includes the bully down the street who terrorized us when we were children. It includes the child molester, the battering husband, the abusive alcoholic, the drug dealer, the crack house operator, and the gang members. It includes everyone. Today's second reading is the parable of the Good Samaritan from the Gospel attributed to Luke, chapter 10, verses 30 to 37. Jesus said, "A man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho and fell into the hands of robbers who stripped him, beat him, and went away, leaving him half dead. Now, by chance, a priest was going down that road, and when he saw him, he passed by on the other side. So likewise, a Levite, when he came to the place and saw him, passed by on the other side. But a Samaritan, while traveling, came near him, and when he saw him, he was moved with pity. He went to him and bandaged his wounds, having poured oil and wine on them. Then he put him on his own animal, brought him to an inn, and took care of him. The next day he took out 2 denarii, gave them to the innkeeper, and said, 'Take care of him, and when I come back, I will repay you whatever more you spend.' Which of these three do you think was a neighbor to the man who fell into the hands of the robbers? He said, the one who showed him mercy. Jesus said to him, go and do likewise.
Years ago, I took a pottery class at a local park. We learned the basics of throwing pots, smashing a lump of clay down on the center of the wheel, and then gradually bringing the wheel up to speed as we pushed the clay, the lump, into a more or less hemispherical shape, perfectly centered on the wheel. That was the first hard thing. Get it wrong, and nothing else would go right. Then the next step was to somehow push down in the center and with your other hand on the outside, begin to draw up a wall of the pot. And keeping your hands wet, always keeping your hands wet, moving over this wall, you could gradually elongate and thin the material and give it a graceful form. Or maybe it would buckle and cave in, as it did for me again and again. I think I was cursed genetically also with dry hands, or my sense of the center was off, or something. Others in the class seemed to get it, and over time produced larger and lighter and more beautiful pots. My products remained small, heavy, clunky. If they were worth putting through the kiln, they too often came out of the firing cracked or flawed. I decided I better keep my day job. If my worth, my value as a human being depended on my ability to make pots, I was in trouble. I talked last week about how my eyes have been opened by living in Mexico and seeing the contrasts, and about how this has changed my perspective towards my home country. So while my remarks today are primarily about the United States, I think they may ring true for other countries like Canada and the United Kingdom in particular. In these countries, the meritocratic culture reigns supreme. In the United States especially, a person is valued less and less for who they are than for what they do. More and more we have become our jobs and professions instead of individuals with stories and relationships and human lives. It wasn't always this way. In the early years of the United States, virtues of democracy and equality were celebrated. Economic equality was much higher in colonial America than it is in America today. Well, at least for free white people. Back then, the top 1% richest households took in less than 9% of the total income. And today, they hoover up about 20%. Clearly, we're moving in the wrong direction. Last week, I was at a dinner. A socially distanced outdoor dinner of vaccinated people. And there, the conversation turned to the movie Nomadland. But since no one had seen it, we quickly turned to the movie and the book, similar theme, Hillbilly Elegy. In this book, J.D. Vance, who is now an investment banker, describes growing up in the Rust Belt town of Middletown, Ohio. He writes of growing up in a family left behind in a failing economy to struggle with poverty, domestic violence, honor violence, and drug addiction. Vance describes the parabolic arc of the American dream in these families he grew up with. The ancestors worked as sharecroppers. Then their children became coal miners, and their children became steel workers. And then, as the jobs disappeared, the arc bent downward, leading to what he calls a hillbilly culture. This culture celebrates honor violence, calling it hillbilly justice. This culture mixes blind patriotism for God and country with a hostility towards government and a willingness to game the welfare systems. Vance says, I quote, "I once ran into an old acquaintance at a Middletown bar who told me that he had recently quit his job because he was sick of waking up early. I later saw him on Facebook complaining about how the Obama economy has affected his life." Vance concludes, "There is a cultural movement in the white working class to blame problems on society or government, and that movement gains adherents by the day." Vance ultimately explores the politicized blame game around the controversial question, why are people poor? On one side, people blame poverty on outside economic forces, such as trade and globalization. On the opposing side, people blame cultural factors, such as poor family values or lack of motivation. But as Joshua Rothman notes in a New Yorker magazine article, there's something deeper. He says, again, I quote, "The choice between these two explanations has long been racialized. Working class whites are said to be poor because of outsourcing. Inner city blacks are imagined to be holding themselves back with hip hop. The implicit theory is that culture comes from within and so can be controlled by individuals and communities, whereas economic structures exert pressures from without and so are beyond the control of those they affect." I, that is Matt, simply wish to highlight that something that Vance lightly touches, that race is an underlying part of the whole situation. As most of us have been awakened to in just the last year or so, race and slavery are bound up deep, deep in the American collective conscience. Race divides America. White supremacy, now awakened from its slumber, points to a nation in which some people don't count or count less. As Unitarian Universalists, we are not a creedal people. We don't have a faith statement or a doctrine of beliefs. Instead, we use our values to guide our choices and lead us into living good lives. We use our principles as a good starting point for articulating those values, even while we realize that each person may interpret or understand those principles in different ways. Consider our first principle, which is to affirm and promote the inherent worth and dignity of every person. So, when we think of the first principle, when we talk of the issue of inherent worth and dignity of every person, we often get focused on individuals. More to the point, do we really have to affirm the worth of those obnoxious, obstreperous, overbearing people, as our reading suggested? Indeed, do we have to include people like Hitler or Pol Pot or other people who have done horrible things, people many would label as evil? We've come to realize that while we can affirm them as people, we do not have to affirm their actions. And in fact, we're called to oppose those who behave badly, who bring harm to others. But while focusing on individual people is important, it is only part of the complex value questions that are bound up in that first principle. I think a larger question is this: how do we create a society, a world in which the inherent worth and dignity is best affirmed for all people? So let us turn to that famous story from the Bible, the Good Samaritan. I'm sure you remember it, but perhaps not the way I know it. That story from the book of Luke in the Bible has become so distorted that many people miss the point entirely. The story has lost its power. We forget that in Jesus' time, the Samaritans were despised people. They were treated like some would treat Muslims or blacks or immigrants or trans people today. We forget that the story is not merely about the kindness of one single individual, but about the brokenness of a larger society, a society that was broken into an us and a them, broken into the Jews and the Samaritans, the others. It's easy to miss that point. It's easy to create an us and a them, and to create all sorts of reasons why the us are so much better than them. And with the division of the us and them in mind, let's return to the issue I raised earlier, that of our increasingly meritocratic and plutocratic society. We have a society where your worth as a human is defined by what you do. What you do could put you in a very small, very prosperous minority, or in a very, or much more likely, in a large, increasingly prosperous, an increasingly impoverished majority. Now, some argue that this imbalance, this inequality, is necessary because it motivates people to do their very best. People do respond to rewards, and the bigger the reward, the better the result. Such a claim seems so obvious as to be irrefutable. But a couple of years ago, several Italian physicists and economists teamed up to use simulations, computer simulations, to explore how important talent was to success compared to simple dumb luck. What they found out was that while some degree of talent was important, certainly, luck was the key factor. Even in the highly meritocratic world of their simulation, a handful of very lucky people ended up with the bulk of the wealth. Even if they were talented in other people, the rest of them, even if they were talented, even if they were more talented, well, they weren't so lucky. So the takeaway was that even in a highly meritocratic society, luck or chance plays an outsized role in the material success of individual people. Which begs the question, is this the kind of society we want to have? Is this a society we want to build? Or is there another way? A way to create a productive society that treats people fairly, a society in which every person counts. The philosopher John Rawls proposed a kind of expanded rule of fairness in his 1971 work, A Theory of Justice. He suggests this thought experiment whenever you were making a decision about how society ought to be organized. Assume you are building a society from scratch, from the ground up, kind of like the old Sims computer games. As in the game, you design your city, your society, you put your people in, your Sims. You get to choose all the rules, all the details for your people. But here's a catch. This is the John Rawls catch, the theory here. After you are done designing, the thought experiment, after you are done designing, you will be dropped into that society you created as one of the Sims, the characters in that society. But the catch is this: you don't have any control over which character you get assigned. It is random. You are, as Rawls put it, behind a veil of ignorance. You know nothing of your race, your gender, your orientation, your citizenship status. You know nothing of your abilities, your skills, your position in society. So knowing that you could be dropped in as anyone, what would you do in your design? You might try to create a fair society with equality for all. That seems pretty obvious. But you also might want people to work hard, though, and be creative, and really build up the society. So you might want to reward hard work and creativity. But how much? Do you want to risk being dropped into this Sim City society as a Sim who is ill, unable to work, and barely scrapes by? Or as a Sim that ends up in Vance's hillbilly culture that discourages education and advancement? Or for that matter, as a Sim that ends up just in the wrong zip code? I used to live in St. Paul, Minnesota for a few years. If you were born in a neighborhood not far from mine, your life expectancy would have been 13 years lower than if you were born just a few miles down the interstate in Minneapolis. By the way, this map is this is a 1930s version of the redlining map for Minneapolis and St. Paul. The areas in red were denied any kind of federal assistance through housing loans. Is this the kind of SimCity you would want to design? I hope that in this conversation today, we've begun to see just how hard it is to apply the concept of inherent worth and dignity for every person at the larger scale, on the scale of the society as a whole, rather than just individuals. And yet, this is what our first principle invites us to do. I hope my message has made you think about how challenging this simple little phrase, our first principle, is. And it's just one of the 7 principles. So here are my takeaways about the first principle. First, everyone does have inherent worth and dignity, no exceptions, but they don't have the right to behave badly. Second, the principle causes us to question all forms of binary us versus them thinking. Third, the principle compels us to work towards creating a more just society, one in which the vagaries of circumstance or luck do not diminish the worth and dignity of anyone. This is hard work, this ethical wayfinding we do together. We are guided by much higher ideals. The path has never been easy, and the way looks even more treacherous ahead. But let us not lose hope. Let me end by reading from UU minister Mark Bellatini, a little reading he called First Principles. There are red rocks in the Gobi Desert I will never see, and blue waves near the Seychelles Islands I will never gaze upon. Songs are now being sung in a cafe in Singapore which will never dance in my heart. Rice cakes eaten yesterday by Ainu grandmothers in the northernmost island of Japan will never cross my lips. The earthy scent of the dark mushrooms growing in some of the forests of the Andes will never melt on my tongue. The texture of Van Gogh's painting, The Potato Eaters in Amsterdam, will never be rough, but I have a problem here. My computer reset, so I'm going to have to read this text from my phone, which is my backup solution. One moment here. I think I was saying something about earthy scent of dark mushrooms. No? The earthy scent of dark mushrooms growing in some of the forest of the Andes will never melt on my tongue. And the texture of Van Gogh's painting, The Potato Eaters in Amsterdam, will never be rough under my roving fingertips. My feet will never walk over Super Bowl fields. My sigh will never be heard at the North Pole. The world is mostly outside me. It's bigger than I am, greater than I am. It's unaware of me speaking here, and I will never know then more than a millionth part of it. I am simply me, and others are who they are. And together, each of us, small fragments of a great whole, make the world. But no one is really alone, even if they feel lonely. All of us are together, different, yet woven intricately into the whole. Each one a facet of reality, no more. Each one important and no less. Come, silence, and bless us with a sense of intrinsic worth.
This is the time in our service when we ask that you remember that we share our gifts here through pledging and donations. We are not meeting in person now, but our connections to each other and our contributions to the community continue. Instructions for payments to the fellowship were on the slide during the announcements before the service. And while you are considering your gifts to the fellowship, remember that each month LCUUF donates 5,000 pesos or more to an organization providing food aid in our lakeside community. For the month of May, we are supporting Tepewa Community Center in Chapala. When you pay your pledge, please add something for Share the Basket, as you used to place pesos in our physical basket. You can donate in the same way that you pay your pledge, but please donate. Share the basket separately or indicate what part of your donation is for the Share basket. Your offerings are greatly received. Let us extinguish our chalice with these words, which we read together. Extinguishing words, we extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we keep in our hearts, and we share with all the world.
Lead us from death to life, from falsehood to truth. Lead us from despair to hope, from fear to trust. Let peace fill our hearts, our world, our universe. Let us dream together, pray together, work together to build one world of peace and justice for all. And now our postlude.
How many roads must a man walk down before you call him a man? How many seas must the white dove sail before she sleeps in the sand? How many times must the cannonballs fly before they're forever banned? The answer, my friend, is blowing in the wind. The answer is blowing in the wind. How many years can a mountain exist before it's washed to the sea? How many years can some people exist before they're allowed to be free? times can a man turn his head and pretend that he just doesn't see? The answer, my friend, is blowing in the wind. The answer is blowing in the wind. How many times must a man look up before he really sees the sky? How many ears must one person have before he can hear people cry? How many deaths will it take till he knows that too many people have died? The answer, my friend,